What happens when the woman once called the most hated person in Britain decides to challenge the future King of England? When Camilla Parker Bowles married Charles in 2005, the world thought they knew her story. But behind the gilded gates of Buckingham Palace, a different tale was unfolding. One of calculated moves, whispered conversations, and a power struggle that would shake the very foundations of the monarchy. For years, she had been the outsider looking in, the woman who destroyed a fairy tale marriage. But now, as Queen Consort, Camilla had something she never possessed before: legitimate power, and she was about to use it in ways no one expected. Prince William, the golden boy of the royal family, had always been seen as untouchable. The people's prince, Diana's son, the future of the monarchy. But what happens when someone refuses to bow to his authority? What happens when the woman his father chose decides to make her own rules? This is not the story the palace wants you to know. This is the story of what really happened behind closed doors. When two of the most powerful people in Britain went head-to-head in a battle that would change the royal family forever. A story of secret strategy and surprising alliances that shocked even those closest to the throne. The game was about to begin, and everyone was about to discover that sometimes the most unlikely players make the most dangerous moves. The morning fog hung thick over Windsor Castle as Camilla Parker Bowles, now Queen Consort, stood in the blue drawing room, her hands wrapped around a delicate china teacup. The steam from her Earl Grey tea mingled with the grey light filtering through the tall windows, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere. But there was nothing peaceful about her expression. Her green eyes, usually warm and welcoming in public, were sharp with calculation. As she reviewed the documents spread across the mahogany table before her, these were not ordinary papers. They contained information that could reshape the entire structure of the monarchy. Details about royal finances, private communications, and most importantly, evidence of decisions made without her consultation. For too long, she'd been treated as Charles's wife first and a royal second, but that dynamic was about to change dramatically. The door opened with a soft creak, and Lady Sarah Troughton, one of Camilla's most trusted ladies-in-waiting, entered with quiet efficiency. Sarah had served the royal family for over 2 decades and had witnessed more palace intrigue than most people could imagine. Her loyalty to Camilla had been tested time and again, but it remained unshakable. "Your Majesty," Sarah said, using the formal address that still felt strange to both of them, "the meeting has been confirmed for this afternoon. Prince William will be attending, along with his private secretary and 2 members of the household staff." Camilla set down her teacup with deliberate care. "And has he been informed about the nature of this meeting?" "No, Your Majesty. As you requested, he believes it's a routine discussion about upcoming charity events and royal patronages." A small smile played at the corners of Camilla's mouth. Good. Sometimes the element of surprise is the most powerful weapon we have. The relationship between Camilla and William had always been complicated, layered with years of history, public scrutiny, and private tensions. When Charles had first introduced Camilla back into his life publicly, William had been polite but distant. He understood his father's happiness, but he also carried the weight of his mother's memory and the public's expectations. Over the years, they had developed what could be called a working relationship. They appeared together at official functions, exchanged pleasantries, and maintained the facade of a united family. But beneath the surface, there had always been an unspoken understanding about boundaries and hierarchies. William was the future king, and Camilla was his father's wife. The power dynamic seemed clear to everyone, except to Camilla herself. She had spent years observing, learning, and quietly building her own network within the palace walls. She had formed alliances with long-serving staff members who had initially viewed her with suspicion. She had earned the respect of foreign dignitaries who had once whispered about the scandal surrounding her marriage to Charles. Most importantly, she had gained the confidence that came with experience and the unique perspective of someone who had fought for everything she had. The documents on her table represented months of careful research and strategic planning. She had discovered that several important decisions about royal patronages and charitable foundations were being made without her input, despite her official role as Queen Consort. More troubling, she had learned that some of these decisions directly affected causes she championed and organizations she had worked with for years. The most significant revelation had come just 2 weeks earlier. William, in his role as president of the Royal Foundation, had made a unilateral decision to redirect funding from several literacy programs that Camilla had personally developed. The programs, which focused on helping adults learn to read, were close to her heart because of her own struggles with dyslexia as a child. The decision had been presented as a strategic reallocation of resources, but Camilla saw it differently. She saw it as a test of her authority, and she had no intention of failing. Lady Sarah remained in the room, sensing that Camilla needed to talk through her strategy. Over the years, Sarah had become more than just a lady-in-waiting. She was a confidant, advisor, and sometimes the only person who truly understood the pressures Camilla faced. The literacy programs have helped over 10,000 adults in the past 3 years, Camilla said, her voice steady but with an underlying edge. These are people who had been forgotten by the system, who found hope through reading. And William wants to redirect that funding to digital literacy initiatives that will primarily benefit people who already have access to technology and education. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. It does seem short-sighted, Your Majesty, but perhaps Prince William simply doesn't understand the full scope of what those programs accomplish. Oh, he understands perfectly, Camilla replied, walking to the window and gazing out at the perfectly manicured gardens.
This isn't about literacy or charity efficiency.
This is about establishing precedents. He's testing whether I'll accept his decisions without question, whether I'll remain the grateful stepmother who doesn't rock the boat. The truth was more complex than either woman could fully articulate. The British monarchy was at a crossroads, facing questions about relevance, modernization, and public support that had never been more pressing. Charles, as the new king, was trying to balance tradition with necessary change. William, as the heir, was eager to implement his vision for a streamlined, more efficient royal family. And Camilla, as the queen consort, was trying to find her place in a system that had never quite known what to do with her. The morning progressed with Camilla reviewing her notes and mentally preparing for the afternoon's confrontation. She had learned long ago that preparation was everything in palace politics. Every word would be weighed, every gesture analyzed, every decision scrutinized by a dozen different people with a dozen different agendas. At precisely 2 o'clock, Prince William arrived at Windsor Castle. He looked every inch the future king, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit, his bearing confident and assured. At 41, he had grown into his role as heir to the throne, balancing his royal duties with his role as a husband and father. But there was something in his expression that suggested he sensed this meeting might be different from what he had expected. He was accompanied by his private secretary, a sharp young man named James Worthington, who had earned a reputation for his ability to navigate complex royal protocols and his unwavering loyalty to William. James carried a leather portfolio containing what William assumed were the standard documents for a routine royal meeting. The meeting took place in the Green Drawing Room, a space that had witnessed countless royal discussions over the centuries. The room's elegant proportions and historical significance seemed fitting for what was about to unfold. Camilla had chosen her seat carefully, positioning herself behind Charles's desk to subtly emphasize her authority as queen consort. "William," she said warmly as he entered, "thank you for making time for this meeting. Please sit wherever you're comfortable." William chose a chair that faced her directly, a choice that spoke to his confidence and his expectation that this would be a straightforward discussion. "Of course, Camilla. I understand we're reviewing the upcoming charity commitments and patron appointments." "Among other things," Camilla replied, her tone still pleasant but with a slight shift that made William glance at her more carefully. "I thought it would be good for us to have a broader conversation about how we coordinate our various initiatives and ensure we're not working at cross purposes." She opened the folder in front of her and withdrew several documents. "I've been reviewing the recent decisions made by the Royal Foundation, particularly regarding the literacy programs that have been redirected to digital initiatives." William's expression didn't change, but James shifted slightly in his seat. This was not the meeting they had prepared for. "The literacy programs," William said carefully, "were producing good results, but we felt the resources could be more efficiently deployed to reach a broader audience through digital platforms. It's about maximizing impact in the modern world." "I see," Camilla said, her voice neutral. "And who exactly made this decision?" "Because as the patron of the National Literacy Trust and someone who has worked personally with many of the adults in these programs, I was not consulted about this change." The room grew noticeably quieter. William realized that this was not going to be the routine meeting he had expected, and he began to understand that Camilla was challenging not just a specific decision, but the entire process by which such decisions were made. "The Royal Foundation operates with a degree of independence," William said, his tone becoming more formal. "We consult with relevant parties when appropriate, but we also need to be able to make strategic decisions efficiently." "Relevant parties," Camilla repeated, her eyebrows rising slightly. "I'm curious about how that determination is made, because it seems to me that the Queen Consort, who has been working in literacy for over 15 years, might be considered a relevant party when decisions are made about literacy programs. The tension in the room was becoming palpable. James looked increasingly uncomfortable, realizing he was witnessing a confrontation between two of the most powerful people in the royal family. William, to his credit, maintained his composure, but there was a new alertness in his eyes as he began to understand that Camilla was making a much larger point than he had initially realized. Perhaps there was a communication breakdown, William said diplomatically. That can happen in large organizations. We can certainly review the process going forward. I don't think this was a communication breakdown, Camilla replied, her voice still pleasant but with an unmistakable firmness. I think this was a deliberate decision to exclude me from discussions about programs I've championed, and I think it represents a misunderstanding about my role as Queen Consort. She leaned forward slightly, a gesture that somehow made her seem both more approachable and more formidable. William, I've spent the last 18 years learning how this family works, how the monarchy functions, and how to navigate the complexities of public service while managing private relationships. I've earned my position not through birth, but through dedication, resilience, and an understanding of what it means to serve the crown. William was quiet for a moment, processing both her words and the shift in dynamics that was occurring. He had always seen Camilla as someone who supported his father and played a complementary role in royal duties, but the woman sitting across from him was asserting an authority and independence that challenged his assumptions about the hierarchy within the royal family. I respect everything you've contributed, William said finally. But we also need to acknowledge that the monarchy is evolving, and sometimes that means making difficult decisions about resource allocation and strategic direction.
Absolutely, Camilla agreed. Evolution is necessary.
But evolution doesn't mean one person making unilateral decisions that affect the work of others. It means collaboration, consultation, and respect for the expertise and experience that different members of the family bring to their roles. The conversation continued for another hour, with both William and Camilla carefully probing each other's positions while maintaining the veneer of royal politeness. But by the time the meeting concluded, both participants understood that something fundamental had shifted in their relationship and in the dynamics of the royal family. As William and James prepared to leave, Camilla made one final statement that would resonate long after they had departed. I want you to know that I have tremendous respect for your vision of the monarchy's future, she said. But I also hope you understand that my role as Queen Consort is not merely ceremonial. I intend to be an active participant in shaping that future, and I expect to be treated as such. After they left, Lady Sarah entered the room to find Camilla standing by the window again, her expression thoughtful but satisfied. How do you think it went, Your Majesty? Camilla smiled, a genuine expression that lit up her entire face. I think Prince William left here with a very different understanding of who I am and what I'm capable of, and I suspect that's exactly what needed to happen. The first move had been made in what would become a complex game of royal chess. Camilla had established her position, challenged the existing power structure, and made it clear that she would not be sidelined or overlooked. But she also knew that William was intelligent, strategic, and not someone who would simply accept this new dynamic without responding. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test not just their individual wills, but the very nature of how the modern monarchy would function. And in the elegant rooms of Windsor Castle, surrounded by centuries of royal history, the future of the British crown was about to be decided by two people who refused to back down. The drive back to Kensington Palace was unusually quiet. Prince William sat in the back of the official Range Rover, his jaw set in concentration as he processed what had just occurred at Windsor Castle. Beside him, James Worthington shuffled through his notes, trying to make sense of a meeting that had gone completely off script. She was remarkably well prepared, James said finally, breaking the silence. The way she presented those documents, the specific details she knew about the literacy programs, this wasn't a spontaneous reaction. William nodded slowly. No, it wasn't. She's been planning this for weeks, maybe months. The question is whether this is about the literacy program specifically or something much bigger. As their car pulled through the gates of Kensington Palace, William was already formulating his response. He had not expected to be challenged so directly by Camilla, but he recognized the sophistication of her approach. She had chosen her battlefield carefully, focusing on an issue where she had clear expertise and moral authority. But William also understood that backing down would set a precedent that could complicate the monarchy's future operations. That evening, William sat in his private study, a room lined with books on constitutional law, royal history, and modern governance. Catherine had taken the children to her parents' house for the weekend, which gave him the solitude he needed to think through his strategy. The room was illuminated by the warm glow of a desk lamp, creating an atmosphere of quiet contemplation that belied the intensity of his thoughts. He picked up his secure phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. The call was answered on the second ring. "Sir Simon," William said, "I need to see you first thing Monday morning. We have a situation that requires careful handling." Sir Simon Case had served as Cabinet Secretary and was one of the most experienced constitutional experts in Britain. His understanding of the delicate balance between royal authority, parliamentary democracy, and public expectations made him invaluable during moments of institutional uncertainty. "Of course, Your Royal Highness. Shall I assume this relates to internal royal matters?" "You should assume this relates to the future structure and decision-making processes of the monarchy," William replied carefully. "We need to discuss precedent, protocol, and practical governance." After ending the call, William spent the next several hours researching historical examples of similar challenges within the royal family. He studied the roles of previous queen consorts, the evolution of royal authority, and the legal frameworks that governed royal decision-making. What he discovered was both enlightening and concerning. Queen consorts had historically wielded varying degrees of influence, often behind the scenes but sometimes quite publicly. Queen Alexandra had challenged King Edward VII on several occasions. Queen Mary had been instrumental in shaping royal policy during World War I. Even the Queen Mother had exercised significant influence over royal decisions well into her later years. But the modern monarchy operated under different pressures and expectations. The public demanded transparency, efficiency, and clear accountability. The media scrutinized every decision and every relationship within the royal family. Most importantly, the monarchy's survival depended on its ability to demonstrate relevance and value to British society. William realized that Camilla's challenge was not just personal or political, it was constitutional. She was essentially arguing for a redefinition of the Queen Consort's role in the 21st century, and her argument had historical precedent and logical merit. Meanwhile, across London, Camilla was having her own strategic conversations. She had invited Dame Jennifer Page, a former chief executive of the Millennium Dome and one of Britain's most respected experts on organisational transformation, to join her for a private dinner at Clarence House. Dame Jennifer had worked with numerous large institutions facing modernisation challenges, and Camilla valued her perspective on how traditional organisations could evolve while maintaining their core identity and purpose. "The literacy programs are just the beginning," Camilla explained as they sat in her private dining room, a space that felt more like a comfortable home than a royal residence. "The real issue is whether the monarchy can function effectively when major decisions are made in isolation without proper consultation and coordination." Dame Jennifer, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing, listened carefully as she sipped her wine. "What you're describing sounds like a classic case of organizational dysfunction. When different departments or divisions operate independently without proper communication channels, you inevitably get conflicts and inefficiencies." "Exactly," Camilla said, "but we're not talking about a business or government agency. We're talking about a 1,000-year-old institution with complex traditions, constitutional implications, and intense public scrutiny." "Which makes it even more important to get the structure right," Dame Jennifer replied. "Traditional organizations that survive and thrive are those that learn to balance continuity with adaptation. The question is whether you can create new processes without undermining existing authority structures." Their conversation continued late into the evening, with Camilla laying out her vision for a more collaborative and coordinated approach to royal decision-making. She wasn't seeking to diminish William's authority or challenge the line of succession. Instead, she was arguing for a system that better utilized the expertise and experience of all senior royal family members. The following Monday morning brought a series of meetings that would prove crucial to the developing situation. William met with Sir Simon Case in a secure conference room at Buckingham Palace, while Camilla had her own consultation with constitutional experts and long-serving members of the royal household. Sir Simon listened carefully as William described the confrontation at Windsor Castle and his concerns about the implications for royal governance. "The challenge you're facing," Sir Simon said, "is that Queen Consort Camilla is technically correct about her constitutional position. While the heir to the throne has certain prerogatives, the Queen Consort also has specific roles and responsibilities that cannot be simply ignored or bypassed." He pulled out a thick folder containing legal documents and historical precedents. "The Queen Consort's role is not merely ceremonial. She has the right to be consulted on matters relating to her patronages and areas of expertise. More importantly, she has the authority to represent the Crown in specific circumstances, which means her exclusion from relevant decisions could be seen as constitutionally problematic." William absorbed this information with growing concern. So you're saying she has a legitimate grievance? I'm saying she has a legitimate constitutional position, Sir Simon replied carefully. Whether that translates into a grievance depends on how the situation is handled going forward. The key is finding a way to respect both your authority as heir and her authority as queen consort. At the same time, Camilla was receiving similar advice from her own consultants. Lord Chamberlain Andrew Parker, who oversaw the royal household, had reviewed the situation and concluded that better coordination mechanisms were indeed necessary. The current system works well for routine matters, he told Camilla, but it breaks down when there are overlapping interests or jurisdictions. The literacy program issue is a perfect example of how good intentions can create unnecessary conflicts. These parallel conversations were setting the stage for what would become known within royal circles as the Windsor Accord, a series of negotiations aimed at establishing clearer protocols for royal decision-making and coordination. The first formal negotiating session took place the following Thursday in the White Drawing Room at Buckingham Palace. The choice of venue was significant. It was neutral territory that belonged to neither William's household nor Camilla's, and its grandeur served as a reminder of the institutional importance of their discussions. William arrived with James Worthington and a constitutional lawyer named Patricia Fellows, a descendant of the famous royal private secretary and an expert in royal prerogatives. Camilla brought Lady Sarah and Sir Nicholas Soames, a long-time friend who had served in Parliament and understood both constitutional law and practical politics. The atmosphere was formal, but not hostile. Both sides understood that they were engaged in something more significant than a personal disagreement. They were potentially reshaping how the monarchy would function for generations to come. I want to begin by acknowledging that we may have different perspectives on how decisions should be made, William said, but we share the same ultimate goal, ensuring that the monarchy serves the British people effectively and maintains public confidence. Camilla nodded in agreement. Absolutely. My concern is not with your authority or your vision for the future. My concern is with ensuring that all members of the royal family can contribute their expertise and experience to achieving our shared goals. The first session lasted 3 hours and covered a range of issues beyond the literacy programs. They discussed the coordination of charitable activities, the management of royal patronages, the planning of official visits, and the process for making decisions about royal properties and resources. What emerged from these discussions was a recognition that the current system had evolved organically over decades without much systematic thought. Different members of the royal family operated with different levels of independence. Consultation occurred inconsistently, and there was no clear mechanism for resolving disputes or coordinating overlapping interests. We need to create what I would call institutional architecture, suggested Sir Nicholas Soames during one particularly productive exchange. Clear protocols that respect traditional authority while enabling effective collaboration. Patricia Fellows agreed, adding, "The key is to establish processes that are flexible enough to handle different types of decisions, but consistent enough to prevent conflicts and misunderstandings." As the sessions continued over the following weeks, a framework began to emerge. The core principle was that major decisions affecting royal activities would be made through a consultative process that respected existing hierarchies while ensuring appropriate input from affected parties. For decisions within William's direct authority as heir to the throne, he would retain final decision-making power, but would be required to consult with other senior royals whose work might be affected. For decisions affecting specific patronages or areas of expertise, the relevant royal family member would have enhanced input and, in some cases, effective veto power. The literacy programs became a test case for this new approach. William acknowledged that the decision to redirect funding should have involved consultation with Camilla given her expertise and involvement. In return, Camilla agreed that such consultations should focus on finding solutions that balanced different priorities rather than simply blocking changes. But the real breakthrough came during the fifth negotiating session, when both William and Camilla realized that their apparent conflict was actually an opportunity to strengthen the monarchy's effectiveness. "What we're creating here," William said during a moment of particular clarity, "is not just a system for avoiding conflicts. We're creating a system that actually harnesses the collective expertise and experience of the royal family more effectively." Camilla smiled, recognizing the shift in William's perspective. "Exactly. The monarchy's great strength is that different members bring different skills, relationships, and insights. The question is whether we can create structures that utilize those strengths rather than working around them." The negotiations had revealed something neither participant had fully anticipated. They actually shared many of the same concerns about the monarchy's future and many of the same ideas about how to address contemporary challenges. Their apparent conflict had been as much about process and respect as about substantive disagreements. By the end of the sixth session, they had drafted what became known as the Royal Coordination Protocol, a document that established new procedures for consultation, decision-making, and dispute resolution within the royal family. The protocol would need to be approved by King Charles and reviewed by constitutional experts, but the framework was solid and comprehensive. More importantly, the process had fundamentally changed the relationship between William and Camilla. They had moved from a polite but distant working relationship to something approaching genuine partnership. They had tested each other's resolve, intelligence, and commitment, and both had emerged with increased respect for the other. But neither William nor Camilla realized that their negotiations had been closely observed by other members of the royal family, the palace staff, and even some outside observers. The implications of their new working relationship would extend far beyond their personal dynamic, affecting the entire structure and culture of the modern monarchy. The stage was set for the next phase of their evolving partnership, one that would test their new protocols and reveal whether their theoretical agreements could work in practice. The real challenge was about to begin. The first real test of the Royal Coordination Protocol came sooner than anyone expected, and from a direction that caught both William and Camilla completely off guard. The catalyst was Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, who had been watching the negotiations between her nephew and sister-in-law with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Anne had always been known for her direct approach to royal duties and her impatience with what she saw as unnecessary bureaucracy or political maneuvering. At 75, she remained one of the hardest-working members of the royal family, maintaining a schedule of official engagements that would exhaust people half her age. She had earned a reputation for saying exactly what she thought, regardless of diplomatic sensitivities. The issue that brought Anne into the evolving drama was the proposed reorganization of the royal family's charitable patronages. As part of the broader modernization effort, there had been discussions about streamlining the number of organizations each royal family member supported, focusing resources on fewer but more impactful relationships. The proposal, which had been developed jointly by William and Camilla using their new consultation protocols, suggested that some of the smaller or overlapping patronages could be consolidated or transferred between family members to create better coordination and avoid duplication of effort. Anne's response was swift and uncompromising. "Absolutely not," she declared during a family meeting at Sandringham House, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been afraid to challenge royal consensus. "You cannot treat decades-long relationships with charitable organizations like corporate assets to be shuffled around for administrative convenience." The meeting had been called by King Charles to discuss the implementation of the new coordination protocols and to get broader family buy-in for the changes that William and Camilla had negotiated. But Anne's intervention transformed what was supposed to be a routine briefing into a fundamental debate about the nature of royal service. "Aunt Anne," William said carefully, "we're not suggesting that anyone abandon their commitments. We're talking about ensuring that our collective efforts are as effective as possible and that we avoid situations where different family members are working at cross purposes." "Are we?"
Anne replied, her penetrating gaze moving between William and Camilla.
"Or are we talking about you two creating a new power structure that centralizes decision-making in ways that could undermine the independence that has made our patronage work effective?" Camilla felt a knot forming in her stomach. She had anticipated resistance to change from various quarters, but she hadn't expected it from Anne, whose practical approach to royal duties she had always admired. "Princess Anne," Camilla said respectfully, "perhaps we could discuss your specific concerns." "The goal is not to centralize power, but to improve coordination and communication." Anne's expression softened slightly, recognizing the genuine intent behind Camilla's words. "My concern is that you're trying to solve organizational problems with organizational solutions, when the real strength of the royal family's charitable work comes from personal relationships and long-term commitments that can't be managed like a business." The debate that followed revealed layers of complexity that neither William nor Camilla had fully anticipated. Anne articulated a perspective that challenged some of their fundamental assumptions about efficiency and modernization. "Take my work with the Save the Children organization," Anne said. "I've been their president for over 50 years. The value of that relationship isn't just in the money we raise or the events we organize. It's in the institutional knowledge, the personal relationships with staff and volunteers, and the credibility that comes from sustained commitment over decades." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. "If you start moving patronages around to achieve better coordination, you risk destroying the very thing that makes them valuable in the first place." King Charles, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke. "Anne raises important points that we need to address. But I also think William and Camilla are correct. that we need better coordination to avoid conflicts and maximize our effectiveness. The family meeting continued for several more hours, with input from other family members and senior staff. What emerged was a recognition that the Royal Coordination Protocol, while well-intentioned, needed significant refinement to address the concerns Anne had raised. More importantly, Anne's challenge had exposed a fundamental tension within the royal family's approach to modernization. There was genuine disagreement about whether the monarchy should operate more like a modern organization with clear lines of authority and systematic processes, or whether it should preserve its more traditional approach of individual family members developing their own areas of expertise and relationships. Over the following weeks, Anne became an unexpected but crucial participant in refining the protocols that William and Camilla had developed. Her decades of experience and her reputation for speaking truth to power made her an invaluable voice in the discussions. "What you need," she told them during one particularly productive session, "is not a system that manages everything centrally, but a system that prevents conflicts while preserving individual initiative and long-term relationships." This insight led to a significant revision of the Royal Coordination Protocol. Instead of creating a centralized decision-making process, they developed what became known as an early warning system, a mechanism for identifying potential conflicts or overlapping interests before they became problems, while preserving individual family members' autonomy in their areas of expertise. The revised system required family members to notify others when they were considering new initiatives or major changes to existing programs, but it did not require approval or consensus for most decisions. The goal was transparency and coordination, not control. But the real test of both the new protocols and the evolving relationships within the royal family came from an entirely unexpected source: a major international crisis that required a coordinated royal response. The crisis began with a devastating earthquake in Turkey that killed thousands of people and left hundreds of thousands homeless. The British government immediately offered aid and support, but there was also an expectation that the royal family would play a role in both the official response and the charitable fundraising efforts. Within hours of the earthquake, multiple royal family members were being approached by different charitable organizations, government agencies, and international groups seeking royal patronage or participation in relief efforts. The potential for duplication, conflicts, and missed opportunities was enormous. Under the old system, each family member would have responded independently to the requests they received, potentially leading to competing fundraising appeals, overlapping visits, or gaps in coverage of important aspects of the relief effort. But the new coordination protocols, refined through Anne's input, allowed for a rapid and systematic response. Within 24 hours, William's office had convened a virtual meeting of all senior royal family members to coordinate their response to the crisis. "We have an opportunity here to demonstrate that our new coordination systems can work under pressure," Camilla said during the emergency meeting. "But we also have a responsibility to respond to a genuine humanitarian crisis as effectively as possible." The coordination meeting revealed both the strengths and limitations of their new approach. Anne immediately offered to lead a delegation to Turkey to assess the situation firsthand, drawing on her experience with similar missions and her established relationships with international aid organizations. William proposed organizing a high-profile fundraising concert, utilizing his connections with musicians and entertainers while coordinating with the government's official relief efforts. Camilla suggested focusing on long-term rebuilding efforts, particularly educational infrastructure, drawing on her expertise in literacy and her relationships with educational organizations. King Charles offered to engage directly with Turkish leadership and coordinate with other European royal families who might also want to contribute to relief efforts. What emerged from this coordinated response was something unprecedented in recent royal history: a comprehensive, systematic approach to a major international crisis that utilized the different strengths and expertise of multiple family members while avoiding duplication or conflicts. The results were impressive. Anne's delegation provided valuable first-hand assessment that helped direct aid efforts more effectively. William's fundraising concert raised over £12 million for earthquake relief. Camilla's educational initiatives attracted additional funding from corporate sponsors who were impressed by the coordinated approach. And King Charles's diplomatic engagement helped facilitate broader European cooperation in the relief effort. More importantly, the coordinated response generated positive media coverage and public approval that exceeded what any individual royal initiative had achieved in recent years. The British public, accustomed to seeing royal family members operating independently or sometimes at cross purposes, responded enthusiastically to what appeared to be a more unified and effective approach to royal service. But the success of the earthquake response also created new challenges and expectations. Government officials began to ask whether the royal family could apply similar coordination to domestic issues. Charitable organizations started to expect more systematic approaches to royal patronage. Media commentators began to analyze and critique the coordination processes, looking for signs of favoritism or power struggles. Most significantly, the success raised questions about leadership and authority within the coordinated system. While the protocols had been designed to preserve individual autonomy while improving coordination, the earthquake response had required someone to take charge and make final decisions about resource allocation and strategic priorities. William had naturally assumed this leadership role as heir to the throne, but Camilla's contributions had been so significant that some observers began to question whether the traditional hierarchy was still appropriate in the new coordinated system. This question came to a head during a follow-up meeting to assess the lessons learned from the earthquake response. The meeting took place at Highgrove House, King Charles's private residence, in an attempt to create a more relaxed and informal atmosphere for frank discussion. "We need to talk about leadership in crisis situations," Anne said with characteristic directness. The earthquake response worked well, but it worked largely because William took charge and everyone else agreed to follow his lead. What happens when there's disagreement about strategic direction? The question hung in the air as the family members considered its implications. The coordination protocols had been designed to prevent conflicts, not to resolve them when they occurred. "That's a fair point," William acknowledged. "We've created systems for consultation and communication, but we haven't clearly defined decision-making authority in situations where consultation doesn't produce consensus." Camilla nodded thoughtfully. "And we haven't addressed the question of expertise versus hierarchy. In some situations, the person with the most relevant experience might not be the person with the highest formal authority." King Charles, who had been listening to the discussion with growing interest, finally spoke. "What you're describing is the difference between coordination and leadership. Coordination helps us work together more effectively, but leadership provides direction and makes difficult decisions when necessary." The conversation that followed would prove to be one of the most important discussions in the modern history of the royal family. They were essentially designing a new model of royal leadership that balanced traditional authority with expertise, individual initiative with collective coordination, and democratic consultation with decisive action. The solutions they developed were complex and nuanced, reflecting the sophisticated understanding of organizational dynamics that had emerged from their months of negotiation and experimentation. But they were also practical and flexible, designed to work in real-world situations rather than just on paper. As the meeting concluded, all participants understood that they had crossed a threshold. They were no longer just a family trying to coordinate their individual activities. They had become a leadership team with shared responsibilities for the future of the monarchy. The implications of this transformation would extend far beyond their internal operations, affecting their relationships with government, their interactions with the public, and their role in British society. The stage was set for the final phase of their remarkable evolution, from a traditional royal family to something entirely new. The transformation of the royal family's internal dynamics might have remained a private matter, known only to those directly involved, if not for an unexpected leak that thrust their evolving relationships into the harsh glare of public scrutiny. The leak came not from a disgruntled staff member or a rival faction within the palace, but from an entirely unexpected source. A casual comment made by a foreign diplomat at a private dinner party in London. The diplomat, who had worked closely with the royal family during the Turkish earthquake relief efforts, mentioned to several journalists at the dinner that he had been impressed by the remarkable coordination and shared leadership he had observed among the senior royals. He praised what he called a new model of royal engagement that seemed more sophisticated and effective than anything we've seen from other European monarchies. The journalists, trained to detect stories behind casual comments, began investigating what the diplomat meant by shared leadership and new model of royal engagement. Within days, they had pieced together enough information to understand that significant changes had occurred in how the royal family operated, and that these changes centered on the relationship between Prince William and Queen Consort Camilla. The first media reports focused on the surface elements of the story, the coordination protocols, the successful earthquake response, and the apparent harmony between family members who had previously seemed to operate independently. But as more information emerged, the coverage began to explore the deeper implications of what was happening within the monarchy. "What we're seeing," wrote one constitutional expert in the Times, "appears to be the most significant evolution in royal governance since the reign of Queen Victoria. The traditional model of individual royal family members operating as separate entities is being replaced by something that looks more like a corporate leadership team or a government cabinet. The public response to these revelations was complex and divided. Many people were genuinely impressed by the effectiveness of the coordinated earthquake response and saw the new approach as evidence that the monarchy was modernizing and becoming more relevant to contemporary challenges. But others were concerned about the constitutional implications of shared royal leadership and questioned whether such changes should be made without broader public consultation or parliamentary approval. The most intense scrutiny focused on Camilla's enhanced role and her apparent equality with William in the new system. Tabloid newspapers, many of which had never fully accepted Camilla's integration into the royal family, seized on the story as evidence of her power grab or her attempt to sideline the future king. These attacks stung Camilla more than she had expected. After years of gradually winning public acceptance, she found herself once again defending her motives and her right to participate fully in royal life. The criticism was particularly painful because she knew that much of it was unfair and based on misunderstandings of what she and William had actually accomplished. But the media storm also had an unexpected effect. It forced both William and Camilla to articulate publicly why they believed their new approach was beneficial for the monarchy and for Britain. William's response came first, in the form of a carefully planned interview with the BBC's royal correspondent. Sitting in his study at Kensington Palace, William spoke with unusual candor about the challenges facing the modern monarchy and the need for evolution and adaptation. The monarchy has survived for over 1,000 years because it has always been willing to change when change was necessary, he said. What Camilla and I have developed is not a power-sharing arrangement or a challenge to traditional authority. It's a recognition that the challenges facing Britain and the Commonwealth today are too complex for any one person to handle alone. He leaned forward, his expression serious and thoughtful. My grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, was an extraordinary monarch who served with dedication and dignity for over 70 years. But she also operated in a different era, with different expectations and different challenges. The monarchy my children inherit needs to be equipped for the realities of the 21st century. The interviewer pressed him about the specific nature of his collaboration with Camilla, and William's response revealed both his respect for her capabilities and his confidence in their partnership. Camilla brings decades of experience, extensive networks of relationships, and expertise in areas where I have less experience, he said. When we were developing our response to the Turkish earthquake, her insights about educational reconstruction were crucial to the success of our efforts. When we're planning long-term charitable strategies, her understanding of literacy issues and adult education helps us avoid mistakes and identify opportunities that I might miss. But it was Camilla's response to the media scrutiny that truly surprised observers and demonstrated how much she had grown into her role as Queen Consort. Instead of defensive statements through palace spokespeople, she chose to address the controversy directly through a series of carefully planned public appearances and interviews. Her most significant response came during a visit to one of the literacy centers that had been at the heart of her original disagreement with William. Standing among adult learners who had benefited from the programs she championed, Camilla spoke with quiet authority about her vision for royal service. I didn't marry into this family to be a decorative figure or to simply support my husband's work, she said, her voice steady and clear. I married into this family to serve the British people and the Commonwealth, and I believe that service requires me to use all of my abilities and experience as effectively as possible. She gestured to the learners around her, many of whom had overcome significant challenges to develop their reading skills. These people didn't give up when learning became difficult. They didn't accept limitations that others tried to place on them. They worked hard, sought help when they needed it, and refused to be defined by other people's expectations. The parallel between the adult learners and her own journey was clear to everyone present, and the power of her message resonated far beyond the immediate audience. The monarchy belongs to the British people, she continued. It exists to serve their interests and to help address the challenges they face. If Prince William and I can work together more effectively than we can work separately, then we have a responsibility to do exactly that. The impact of Camilla's statements was immediate and profound. Public opinion polling showed a significant increase in support for both her personally and for the coordinated approach she and William had developed. Even some of the tabloid newspapers that had initially criticized the changes began to acknowledge the logic and benefits of the new system. But the real test of public acceptance came during the state visit of the French president, an elaborate ceremonial occasion that required precise coordination between multiple royal family members and demonstrated the monarchy's role in international diplomacy. State visits had traditionally been managed according to rigid protocols that had evolved over centuries, with each family member playing predetermined roles based on their position in the line of succession. But the new coordination system allowed for a more flexible and strategic approach that better utilized the different strengths and relationships of various family members. Camilla's fluent French and her long-standing relationships with French cultural organizations made her an ideal person to handle certain aspects of the cultural program. William's connections with French business leaders and environmental organizations positioned him perfectly to lead discussions about economic and environmental cooperation. Princess Anne's expertise in equestrian sports and her relationships with French agricultural organizations made her the natural choice to oversee the rural and agricultural elements of the visit. The result was a state visit that was widely praised by both British and French officials as one of the most successful in recent memory. The French president himself commented publicly on the impressive coordination and sophistication of the royal family's approach to the visit. More importantly, the success of the state visit demonstrated to government officials, diplomatic corps, and international observers that the royal family's new collaborative approach enhanced rather than undermined their effectiveness in fulfilling their constitutional and ceremonial roles. By the 6-month anniversary of Camilla's original confrontation with William over the literacy programs, the transformation of their relationship and the broader royal family dynamics had become an accepted reality. The coordination protocols had evolved into sophisticated systems for managing everything from charitable activities to international relations, but perhaps the most significant change was in the relationship between William and Camilla themselves. What had begun as a power struggle had evolved into a genuine partnership based on mutual respect, complementary strengths, and shared commitment to the monarchy's success. They had developed what palace insiders described as an almost telepathic understanding of each other's perspectives and capabilities. During public events, they moved seamlessly between leading and supporting roles, depending on the situation and their respective expertise. "It's remarkable to watch," observed one senior diplomat who worked closely with both of them. "They've created something that looks effortless, but is actually the result of very sophisticated coordination and deep mutual trust." The success of their partnership had also influenced other relationships within the royal family. King Charles, initially somewhat skeptical of the changes his wife and son had initiated, had become an enthusiastic supporter of the coordinated approach. Princess Anne, who had provided crucial input during the development of the protocols, had emerged as something of an elder stateswoman within the new system, offering guidance and perspective based on her decades of experience. Even the younger generation of royals, including Catherine and other family members, had begun to adopt similar collaborative approaches in their own work. But the most profound impact of the transformation was on the monarchy's relationship with the British public. Opinion polling showed consistent increases in support for the royal family, with particular improvements in perceptions of their effectiveness and relevance to contemporary challenges. "What we're seeing," explained one constitutional historian, "is a monarchy that has successfully adapted to 21st century expectations without abandoning its essential character and constitutional role. The collaborative approach has made them more effective while also making them more accessible and relatable to ordinary people." The story that had begun with a disagreement over literacy funding had evolved into something far more significant: a successful transformation of one of the world's oldest institutions through the vision, determination, and collaborative spirit of two people who had refused to accept the limitations others had tried to place on them. As Camilla stood once again in the blue drawing room at Windsor Castle, exactly 1 year after her confrontation with William, she reflected on the journey they had travelled together. The morning fog still hung over the castle grounds, but the atmosphere in the room was entirely different from that tense morning when she had decided to challenge the existing order. William joined her at the window, and they stood together looking out at the gardens where kings and queens had walked for centuries. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't spoken up about the literacy programs?" William asked. Camilla smiled, remembering the mixture of anger and determination that had driven her to action. "I think we would have continued operating as separate entities, missing opportunities to serve more effectively and probably frustrating each other without understanding why. The monarchy needed this evolution," William said thoughtfully. "It needed us to figure out how to work together better. But more than that, it needed to demonstrate that tradition and innovation don't have to be enemies." They turned away from the window, ready to begin another day of coordinated service to the Crown and the British people. Behind them, the morning sun was beginning to burn through the fog, illuminating the ancient stones of Windsor Castle and marking the beginning of a new chapter in the long history of the British monarchy. The bold move that had started as Camilla's challenge to William's authority had become something neither of them had initially imagined, a partnership that strengthened both of them and, through them, strengthened the institution they served. In the end, they had discovered that true power came not from asserting individual authority, but from finding ways to combine their different strengths in service of something larger than themselves. The game of royal chess that had begun with a single decisive move had evolved into something far more sophisticated and ultimately more successful than either player had originally envisioned. And in the elegant rooms of Windsor Castle, surrounded by centuries of royal history, the future of the British crown was being written by two people who had learned that the most surprising partnerships often proved to be the most powerful ones.